Okay, Chapter 1, Lesson 1 focuses on place value and patterns, but before I can start the homework tutorial part, I need to go through a few things, specifically place value and the base 10 blocks. So we're going to start with something called the large cube. Now to draw a cube, you'd start with a square. So here's a square if you want to follow along and draw it. If you draw a dot in the middle of the square, that's going to be the bottom tip of your next square. So you can see that I'm making a line on top, to the right, and I created another square that kind of overlaps. Now the last part to create the cube is you connect, you see how you have two squares? The top left with the top left, the bottom left with the bottom left, the bottom right with the bottom right, and the top right with the top right. The value of the large cube is 1000. The next thing is what we call a flat. And it's called a flat because it's just a flat square. And the value of the flat is 100. So we have a large cube, a flat. The next one is what we call a long. The long is worth 10. And it looks like what they used to call an envision rod. So it's just a little long stick. And last but not least, we have a small cube. And the small cube, for now, will be valued at 1. The interesting part is we'll be using the flats, longs, and small cubes with decimals, and so we'll actually be changing the value. But as of right now, it's a small cube. And unlike the large cube, you don't need to make the small cube 3D, and please don't when you're drawing it out on paper. How they got these numbers is that visually this is your small cube and it's just 1. The long, if you're to be more detail oriented, would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 small cubes attached in one long line to be the 10. The 100 is very similar. If you want to take the small cube, you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Or you could just count by tens and realize that it's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. And last but not least is the large cube. And it's called 1000 because, let's see how dexterous I am. 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900, and 1000. And you can see that they match up perfectly. These things have been introduced quite a few times throughout your grade levels. The main difference between 4th and 5th grade is that we're going more to thousands, and in 6th grade you're going to be hitting more towards the 10,000s. That being said, let's start off with a simple 3 longs. What is the value of 3 longs? Well, there's 2 ways you could figure it out. You could start counting it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. However, that's not the most efficient way to go. So if we're talking about 3 longs, and we know that the long represents 110, we could just count by tens. 10, 20, 30. So I want you to get used to seeing 3 longs, and when you draw them out, 1, 2, 3, you simply say 10, 20, 30. So 3 longs is 30. So now that we have 30, I want to now compare it to another number. So let's compare it to this. How much is this total? A small cube represents 1, so it's 1, 2, 3. So we'll draw those out. 1, 2, 3. Keep in mind for the small cubes, I do not want it, nor should you be doing the 3D boxes like you would for a large cube. Now if we compare the 30 with the 3, we can say a simple sentence such as 30 is bigger than 3.
Oh, sit. It was 5. Would you go? Yeah.
30 is bigger than 3 is a pretty simple start. So we have 3 longs at 30, 3 small cubes at 3, and we're saying that 30 is bigger than 3. Now if we're to compare it more specifically, we could say 30 is blank times as many as 3. So when you see bigger than, another way to say it could be times as many as. 30 is bigger than 3, 30 is blank times as many as 3. Now, in order to fill in that blank, you have to think, is it 10 times as many as 3, 100 times as many as 3, or 1,000 times as many as 3? And so you think, how many of the small cubes do you need to make one long? If I had this small cube, I would need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times it. If I had another small cube, I need another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 30 is 10 times as many as 3. So yes, we know that 30 is bigger than 3, but more specifically, we also know that 30 is 10 times as much as 3. Because it would take 10 of these small cubes, 10 of these small cubes, 10 of these small cubes to equal 30. I certainly put many here. I should have put much, and so I'm just going to edit it like that. Now let's say that the roles are reversed. Let's now compare 3 and 30. So in my picture, I'm going to use a different color, and I'm going to draw it out again. We know that 3 small cubes is equivalent to 3, just as we know 3 longs, 1, 2, 3, is equivalent to 30. Now here, since it's reversed and we're starting with the small and comparing it with the larger one, we would say something more along the lines that 3 is smaller than 30. And when you're saying 3 is smaller than 30, we won't be using the phrase times as much as. Instead, we'll be using a fraction and saying of 30. So 3 is blank of 30. Now in this blank, because it's getting smaller, and what you'd want to do to these is decompose it. When by decompose, I mean if you could see these are kind of stuck together. If you could take these apart and break them into smaller parts, that's what you would do. So you're using only a fraction of something, a part of something. If you look at the word fract and fraction, the word fract, F-R-A-C, is actually a root word meaning break. So if you think about a fracture, like when you break your arm, it's a piece. So here we're going to be using a fraction. And the fraction that we'll be using is going to make sense. We're going to take this 10 here that we had from the first one. So we'll be taking this 10 here and we're going to be creating it into a fraction. And so the fraction is going to be 1/10 of. So to do this, the only difference, 3 is smaller than 30, is we're going to be using now a fraction, because 3 is a fraction of, it's a part of, it's a break of 30. 3 is 1/10 of 30. And we got 1/10 by using the 10 times as much and putting a numerator 1 over this is your denominator. Okay, let's do another example. Now I'm going to go through the same kind of thought process and the same kind of model as I did with the first one, but now I'm going to be using a different amount. Instead of working with the tens, I'm going to be working with the hundreds. So right here, if we have 2 flats, this one is 100, and you can count it out, or you can count by hundreds. 100 and 200. So let's start by drawing 2 flats. There's 1, 2. And underneath, we'll label it 200. What I want to do now is compare 200 to 2 small cubes. I'm going to see how this kind of differs. Make sure that your flat looks a little bit longer and that your cubes are smaller. If these are the same size, then it'll be very difficult to differentiate the two in your pictures and drawings. So you have 2 flats and 2 small cubes. If we were to compare it, we can easily see this is bigger than this, and this, representing 200, is bigger than 2. So let's start with that sentence. 200 is bigger than 2. Now, academically, instead of saying is bigger than, we can get even more specific. And when we do, we'll use the phrase times as much as. So 200 is blank times as much as 2. Now, figuring out how many times as much as, you have to think, how many of these small cubes would you need to hit to fulfill a flat? So count it up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And we can keep counting, or we know that each of these rows is, which is a long, is equivalent to 10. So if I stopped at 20, this would be 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. It will take 100 small cubes to equal this flat. So 200 is 100 times as much as 2. And you can prove it by saying you need 100 of these and you need 100 of these to be equivalent. So 200 is bigger than 2. Bigger than is the same as times as much as. 200 is blank times as much as. And we got the 100 by saying how many of these small cubes would fit for flat. 200 is 100 times as much as 2. Now, the same process was what we did the first time when we were comparing 30 to 3. The only difference is this number right here. 30 is 10 times as much as 3, whereas 200 is 100 times as much as 2. Same process, but the only difference is how many of these small cubes did you need to make this long? How many of these small cubes did you need to make this flat? All right, now let's move on to comparing it if you're referring to 2 and 200. So now you can see I switched it. So for this one, we're going to be using fractions. We're going to be starting with a smaller quantity, 1, 2, and we're going to be comparing it to 200. We know that 2 is smaller than 200. Now here's where it gets tricky. Smaller than 200 means that you need to decompose, you need to take this apart, you need to turn this into a fraction. Keep in mind over at the left side how I put the word fraction, and the word frac is a root word. And frac means to break, just like if you were to fracture your arm. So if we were to break these apart, how many small pieces would we get? If I were to break this apart into small cubes, I would have 100 of them. So 2 is 1/100th of 200. Now we already know when you see smaller than, it's blank of, and we got that 100 using the same one up here. Okay, so I hope this makes sense, and if not, we'll probably be more clear when we start the actual homework. So let's start the first homework problem. All right. So now we're doing the homework. It's Chapter 1, Lesson 1, Place Value and Patterns. The Common Core standard is 5.nbt.1, which stands for Numbers Base 10, the NBT. And the goal is to understand the place value system. We'll start at number 2. 90 is 1/10 of blank. Now we're going to try to mimic and model what we did in the example ones prior to the video. And so first off, when we say is 1/10 of, are we saying it's bigger than or smaller than? Now let's look at our notes. Here's an example of the 1/10 of, and it's our red ones. And we see that it's the smaller than. So the first thing I'm going to write is I'm going to actually use my red one since that's the color we're doing for smaller than. And I'll put 90 is smaller than blank. Because I know that 1/10 of blank means the number to the left is smaller than the number to the right. 90 is smaller than blank. Now, you have to really pay attention to the fraction. Is it 10 times as much as, is it 1/10, 1/100th, or 1/1000th? Let me start over. Okay, so as I was mentioning, it's really important that you pay attention to the fraction. So this is 90 is 1/10 of. And from the 1/10 of, we know that if it's a fraction, it's smaller than. The number to the left is smaller than the number to the right. So 90 is smaller than. You can already start guessing what numbers could go here. 90 is not smaller than 9, so we're not going to get small. The number to the right is not going to be smaller, it's going to be bigger. So it might be 900. 90 is smaller than 900, that is true. It could be 90 is smaller than 9,000. That sounds good. 90 is smaller than 90,000, and so forth. 90 is not smaller than 90, that's equal to, and 90 is not smaller than 9. So it might be one of these, and it could keep adding zeros. It could be smaller than 900,000 and so forth. But the key here is it's 1/10 of. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw and use pictures at this point. So I know in the past what we've been doing is drawing every single one out. For this worksheet, I'm just going to put, if I had 9 longs. So 9 longs is the same as 90. And which one is that the same as? Is that like saying the hundredths or the thousandths? And at this point, I could even say 90 of these thousandths. Now, let's look at the actual pictures to help us. If we had 9 longs, it would look something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So here's some 9 longs. This is the equivalent to 90. 90 longs, 90 is 1/10 of. Now, I'm going to start with 900 because that's our first option. Is that 1/10 of these? Well, let's take one and match it up with the other first. If I had 10 of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, it would be 900. So that's 10. Here's the next one, 10. I'm going to run out of space here. Here's the next one, 10. The next one to match it up. I have 1/10 of it. I have 1/10. I have 1/10. I have 1/10. Again, I have 1/10 of. This long is 1/10 of this flat. Oh, I'm just accumulating them here, meaning I'm gathering quite a few. This long is 1/10. This long is 1/10 of that, and this long is 1/10 of that. And you can see that if I have 9 flats and 9 longs, then each long is 1/10 of, 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 1/10 of. Therefore, 90 is 1/10 of 900. Because it takes 10 of these, 10 longs, to make 100. So this is 1/10 of that. It won't be this. That one is where you'll need 100 of them. It won't be that because that's too much. So 90 is smaller than 900. And to show my work, what I usually do is 90 is smaller than, and I list out my options, and then I think of which one makes sense. 9 longs is 1/10 of 9 flats. See, this is 1/10 of this because it takes 10 of these to create one. So it's 1/10 of. Let's try the next one and see how it goes. So following the same scheme where we're going to say 800 is 10 times as much as, and the first step is to decide whether 10 times as much as means 800 is bigger than or 800 is smaller than. So let's look through our cheat sheet again. 800 is 10 times as much as. I could see that these are the fractions of something. It's a part of something, so it's smaller. And the times as much as is bigger than. So the first thing I'm going to do is already determine that 800 is bigger than. Now, there's quite a few answers that this could be. And what I'm going to do, just like I did over here, is I'm going to list them out. 800 is bigger than 80. It's also bigger than 8. So, the first thing I did was change this into a simpler sentence. So instead of saying times as much as, I'm going to say, is it bigger than or smaller than? When you see words like of, it implies it's smaller than because it's a fraction. When you see times as much as, it's bigger than. 800 is bigger than blank. From there, I'm going to list the possible answers. 800 is not bigger than 8,000. It's not bigger than 80,000. It's not bigger than 800,000. So I'm not going to list the larger numbers. But 800 is bigger than 80, and it is bigger than 8. That's kind of like step 1 and 2 combined. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw them out. 800 is the same as 8 of these flats. 80 is the same as 8 of the longs, and 8 is the same as 8 of the small cubes. And then I'm going to try to visualize it. Keep in mind that we're looking for 10 times as much as, not 100 times as much as. So we're looking for something where it's only 1/10 of, or 10 of them in here. So here's 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, and 800. So we have our 800 over there. Now this is bigger than. This is 10 times as much as what number? Now let's try the 10s first because here's the 80 rods next. Will it take 10 of these to make one of those? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Here's 10 times as many. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 times as many. To match this one up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times as many. And to say it another way, this is one long, 10. This is 100. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. 10 of these create an equivalent amount. 10 times the 10s is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. So 10 times 10 equals this 100. And again, and again, and again. So here you could see that this is 10 times this. 8 flats is 10 times the same as 8 longs, and 8 longs equal 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. So our final answer is 800 is bigger than 80. But not only is it bigger than 80, the reason why it's 80 instead of 8 is because we're looking at the 10 times as much. If this were to say 100 times as much, the answer would be different. If this were to say 100 times as much, the answer would be 8. But we're looking at 10 times as much. It takes 10 longs to make one flat. It takes 10 longs to make one flat. Keep in mind, if this said 100, it would give you a different answer. But for this answer, it is 80. Now, hopefully you could do number 4. And what I'd like to challenge you to do is number 1, showing your work. So I don't want you just to say, oh, number 1's done for us, it's 4,000. I want you to go back to number 1 and actually show your work for it. In future lessons, I'm going to probably be doing numbers 1 and 2 rather than 2 and 3. I will also do any middle ones if it looks different. So I will be doing number 5 in the video. I'll be doing the 2 bottom word problems, 13 and 14, and I will get you started on the check-in by helping you set up the problem for just one of them. So I'm going to probably debate on doing number 1 instead of number 2. So let me take a quick break and I'll start it up again. Okay, for this section, numbers 5 through 12, they don't give you a lot of room. And so what I would do is I would use a scratch paper. But keep in mind that when you use a scratch paper, you will have to staple this together and turn it in order to receive full credit, because I don't want to just see answers, and I want to see how you got to that number. That being said, on your scratch paper, I would start by writing some of the problem out. So, number 5. I don't want to get confused with the decimal later on, so I'm just going to put number 5 like that. You can see I started with a 5 and a dot, but to make it look like that, but I don't want to get confused with decimals. If 100 is the number, here's a short sign for number, just the pound or a hashtag. 10 times as much as, and then over here, 1/10 of. Sorry, it's a little messy. I need something more sturdy to write on next time. And I will be 100% honest, when I was looking at this, I wanted to make sure that I was teaching you the right way, and so I looked up the answer key to make sure that I was going to do it the right way. That being said, when they're saying 10 times as much as, this is where they want the 100 to go. They're saying blank, this number is your blank, is 10 times as much as 100. So in this chart that they want you to fill out, they're saying that this number right here is your blank and is 10 times as much as in your original number, which is 100. So we know that this number right here, when we see 10 times as much as, before we look at our cheat sheet, think to yourself, is that bigger than or smaller than? I'll let you think for a second. Let me take out the cheat sheet. 10 times as much as means bigger than, and unfortunately I used the wrong color. But blank is bigger than, is 10 times bigger than, but bigger than 100. Now there's quite a few numbers that could go here. 1,000 could go there, 10,000 could go there, 100,000, and so forth. But remember, we want 10 times as much as, not 100,000. So now I'm going to start drawing some pictures. So 1,000 looks like 1 cube. And this is 10 of these large cubes. And then 100 is 1 flat. And we've talked about these quite a few times. If you have 10 of these, you will make 1 cube, not 10 large cubes. Therefore, if you want 10 times as much as 100, 1 flat, 10 times is 1,000. Think about it. This is 1 flat, 1 flat. If we have 1 flat, 100, that's 1 flat, and we have 10 times of these, we have this 10 times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, we will create one of these. So that's 1,000. It would not create 10 of those, so therefore the answer is 1,000. And your answer right here is 1,000. So in your chart, you could simply put 1,000, so long as you remember to attach this, numbered and everything, when I collect your homework. Now you have to do the right side, 1/10 of. We're going to do that the same way. I'm going to do it in a different color. For this one, blank. And you're going to have to start creating the sentence first. To start the sentence, they want the blank first. This number is 1/10 of the original number, 100. So what number is 1/10 of 100? When you're looking at 1/10 of, I want you to think, does that mean bigger than or smaller than? Think to yourself, it's a fraction, you're getting smaller. So blank is smaller than 100. 100 looks like one of these. And what number is smaller than 100? Well, 10 is smaller than 100. 1 is smaller than 100. So the answer is either 1 rod or 1 small cube. Keep in mind we want 1/10 of, not 1/100. So if we're looking at 100 here, and if we look first at the rod, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is 1/10 of. If you break this into 10 pieces, you'll have a rod. Therefore, since you want 1/10 of, the answer is actually going to be the 10. So for your chart here, it'd be 10. And for your chart here, it'll be 10. If you had a small cube and you said the answer is 1, then this should have said 1/100th. But you can see that it says 1/10 of, and you need 10 longs when you decompose this the first time. I hope that this pattern helps. Literally, the chart is just like numbers 2, 3, and 4. It's just asking for 2 things now, and it will be showing a lot of work. So this one will get a little tedious. I do want to encourage you to keep making sure to write everything out from pictures and everything. If you want access to the tools and things, you can create your own. They have online tools like this, and I can give you a website for that, as well as Think Central itself if you have logged in the past. And we will be logging in, especially for taking the Chapter 1 test. Now I'm just going to quickly go over numbers 13 and 14. I'm not going to solve it for you, however, I will help you set up the equation. So these ones I will not solve for you, but I will set up the equation. Let's read it together. The eatery restaurant has 200 tables. So you have something that has 200 tables. You're at a restaurant, you have 200 tables total. On a recent evening, there were reservations for 1/10 of the tables. How many tables were reserved? So, imagine if you were working at a restaurant. You have 200 tables total, and now someone reserved some of them. They must have been having a party, and they need 1/10 of the tables. How many tables were reserved so that you could still, serve the other ones? Looking through this, all you have to do is create a sentence that looks just like numbers either 1 or 2. But the problem is, where does that 200 go? Will it be 200 is 1/10 of blank, or would it be blank is 1/10 of 200? Well, let's think about it. What would happen if you said 200 is 1/10 of blank? Let's see just what would happen. Because here's the 1/10 of. So either the 200 will go here or the 200 will go here. Let's logically go through this and see if it makes sense, because if not, it's wrong. So if you're saying 200 is 1/10 of, you're saying 200 is 1/10, meaning smaller than blank. And your possible answers would be 200 is smaller than the number 2,000. 200 is smaller than the number 20,000. Now look at your possible answers if this were the equation. If this were the equation, would that make sense? Can I call and reserve to make 2,000 tables when you only have 200? No, that's crazy. So this is not the correct setup. So let's try the next way. Instead of the 200 being here, what if we put the 200 here and keep that 1/10 of? Blank is 1/10 of 200. Now let's start putting in possible answers here. 1/10 of means smaller, so blank is smaller than 200. Now, what's smaller than 200? Well, 20 is a possible answer. 2 is a possible answer. 2,000 to 20,000, those aren't possible answers because you're saying this is smaller than 200. Now, does this make sense? If I were to call to make a reservation, say, and ask, can you give me 1/10 of your tables? Can you reserve 20 or 2? That makes sense. So here's your equation. And from here, all you have to do is solve it. I know I went through that kind of fast, so let me try to slow down on the next one and see if you can follow along my thought process. What I'm doing is I'm taking the numbers 200 and 1/10 of, the 200 and the 1/10 of, and I'm plugging it into a familiar thing that we've already done in the past. We've already done several times actually. And I'm saying which one would make sense? 200 is 1/10 of, or blank is 1/10 of 200. And when you go through the thought process, this blue one is the one that makes sense. This one would be too much. Feel free to rewind if I went a little too fast, but I'm going to go on to number 14. Mr. Wilson has $3,000 in his bank account. Miss Nelson has 10 times as much money in her bank account as Mr. Wilson has in his bank account. How much money does Miss Nelson have in her bank account? That's a good question. So we're saying that Mr. Wilson has $3,000. That's Mr. Wilson's bank account. We're saying that Miss Nelson has 10 times as much money. Who has more money at this point? If we're saying Miss Nelson has 10 times as much money in her bank account as Mr. Wilson, who has more, Miss Nelson or Mr. Wilson? Miss Nelson. So when we go through the possibilities, keep in mind that we need to cross out the one in which Miss Nelson will have less, because Miss Nelson should have more, so we're going to circle the one in which she has more. So we're going to do the same thing. We have 10 times as much as, but we don't know if it's the 3,000 goes first or second. So here's your possible ones. You see how you have the 3,000 here? You're going to put 3,000 is 10 times as much as blank, or blank is 10 times as much as 3,000. So those are the two things that we're going to go through. Mr. Wilson has $3,000 in his bank account, so we have this $3,000 looming. And we want to see if 3,000 is 10 times as much as blank. Now, if this is the sentence, then what we're saying is 3,000 is 10 times as much as means bigger than. Is bigger than. And what are the possible answers? 3,000 is bigger than what number? It's bigger than 300. It's bigger than 30. It's bigger than 3. It is not bigger than 30,000. It is not bigger than 300,000. It is not bigger than 3 million. So these are going to be our possible answers. If Mr. Wilson has 3,000, these are the possible answers for Miss Nelson. Does 330 or 3 sound reasonable for Miss Nelson? No, because Miss Nelson has 10 times as much money in her bank as Mr. Wilson. That means she should have more. These values here need to be bigger, and they're not. So this is not the proper setup. We have the right numbers, but they're not in the right order. What we should have done was blank is 10 times as much as, and we're getting this from this phrase right here, 10 times as much as 3,000. Okay, now from here, what you're saying this number is bigger than 3,000. So what are the numbers bigger than 3,000? Well, 30,000, 300,000, oops, I don't know why I put another number there, and 3 million. Miss Nelson has more money than Mr. Wilson at his 3,000, so these are possible. Now, which one the actual answer is up for you to decide and to prove and to justify, but that is the setup. Keep in mind, we're taking the numbers, 3,000, and we're just deciding whether it goes in the beginning or goes in the end of the statement, 10 times as much as. So we take that phrase, 10 times as much as, 10 times as much as, And we have to just decide whether the 3,000 goes before and after, and the only way to do that is to think it through. And it's okay to write things out and to cross it out. That's part of the learning process. It's part of justifying and explaining. I'm debating whether or not we should cover numbers 1 and 2, but I will just do one of them so that you could see. What is 10 times as much as 700? What is means you don't know. So you could just put a line. So that line is 10 times as much as 700. And these look just like they did in numbers 1, 2, 3, 4 at this point. So the only difference is now they're asking it as a question form as opposed to giving to you in a statement. If you were able to do numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you were able to answer the statement, this is now just the question. When you see the word what, just put in a blank line and copy everything else out. Think about how to set this one up. What is 1/10 of 3,000? That looks just like one of these already, but where the what is an underlying value. I hope that this tutorial helped. Feel free to give me any comments and things, and I highly encourage you to rewind and replay things until it starts to make sense. And feel free to email me questions, post it on YouTube, or ask me during class, because we will go over it. All right, have a good day.